Welcome to today's SNAP session, Managing Rents and Expenses During COVID-19. I'm Suzanne Silverman, Editorial Director of Multi-Housing News, and I'm talking with Daryl Carter, Chairman, CEO, and founder of Avanis Capital Management, which to date has acquired, renovated, and managed 10,000 units, primarily affordable and workforce housing in states around the country. I'd like to thank Butterfly MX for sponsoring today's SNAP session. We are recording this session, and it will be available for later viewing. In addition, we're going to leave some time at the end to answer your questions, but please feel free to submit them at any time during the webinar. According to the National Multifamily Housing Council's data as of April 12th, 84% of renters made full or partial payments in April, down only slightly from 91% in the first 12 days of March and 90% during the same period last year. Stimulus checks have started to arrive, and unemployment payments have been increased. At the same time, some 17 million people have filed for unemployment in the past few weeks, and that number is expected to continue rising, with the unemployment rate expected to peak at 15.6%. Property owners and managers that have not yet put a longer-term plan in place might want to do so now. So let's talk about the most effective approaches to addressing residents' individual situations while managing property-level expenses. There's a lot of better than expected news out there, Daryl, but still a lot of uncertainty about how long our current situation will last and when the employment picture will improve. So what's the best approach for resolving apartment rent payment problems? Do you establish an across-the-board policy, or do you take things on a case-by-case basis?
Well, good morning, Suzanne. I believe that, the most important thing in this circumstance is having a consistent dialogue with our residents. That's been the approach that we take, meaning that, we certainly, we communicate with them in terms of information, and we certainly make ourselves available to any concerns they have. The payment of rent, we are finding, is just one issue that people have. I mean, certainly, people are concerned about the sanitation conditions, which of course we focus very much on, and we've been having our maintenance techs, really sanitize our common areas on a very, very regular basis. I mean, people are concerned about that. People, and some are concerned, of course, about paying rent, who may have had some job losses. Our initial approach, we decided in March, we decided to implement a 10% rent discount for the month of April, which we notified all of our residents. And we got very, very strong positive response that we were doing that. And on average, I mean, our rents range from $1,300 to $1,400 a month across our portfolio. So that's, $130 to $140, which offsets some cost as it relates to the virus. So, that was the first thing we did as to be kind of proactive, and we also felt that difference might mitigate some rental defaults. And we've been very pleased with our collections. And I think, generally speaking, I think the industry, and I talked to many of the other multifamily owners, were really concerned about where it could get. I mean, we had actually planned that we would have 10 to 15% of our residents not pay, and it's been nowhere near that. I think that, and regarding the specifics of your question, we really look at it on a case basis. And I think the first strategy we always have is, number one, to be empathetic to the situation. And then secondly, making sure that a resident who has been impacted understands the resources that are available to them. I can tell you that I am a news junkie and CNN and all the other, and I stay abreast through trade associations as to legislation. And when the final, $2 trillion CARES Act was enacted, what I thought it did, I probably knew about 30% of it. So, my accounting and tax team really went through it in detail to figure out things that maybe we were even eligible for. And so the important thing is then to um, uh, make sure our residents understand what they might be eligible for. And again, because I just think it's just hard not for everybody to understand what's in that bill. So one of the things that we've done is made sure that anyone who has been impacted, we have given them the details of what they might be eligible for through the federal government. And there are some local programs as well that we've stayed in tune to also.
So you took an overall approach to April. You gave this break across the board. You're giving out information to help people navigate the system and figure out what they might be eligible for. And then you mentioned that going forward, you're taking it more on a case-by-case basis. And as you're doing that, I guess two questions. How much should you delve into these individual resident situations? And how much do you recommend customizing solutions for each case?
Well, that's our approach, because I think, there is not one size that fits all. I mean, you may have someone who is paid through April but may need help in May. And, so I think everybody's situation is different. We operate in 12 states, and every state is different. There are people, for instance, we're doing renovations in a number of states where we've had to stop our construction because it's viewed as non-essential. But in certain states, we can continue to do construction. So I think based on the geography, every situation is different. And so it does call for a customized approach. So we've as an organization, we've come up with some criteria. I mean, certainly we look into how long the resident has lived there, what their track record has been, and consistency in paying rent. I mean, we factor all those things in it and try to come up with something customized.
And is this a time to just take those things into consideration, but still offer options for residents that maybe don't have as solid a history with you? Are you still working with those people, or are you treating those differently? What do you do with that now?
Well, we're working with everyone based on their situation. For instance, I mean, we own a number of communities in Orlando, and we have a number of residents that work at the theme parks, Disney and Universal, and many of those companies have continued to pay their hourly workers for a period of time, and that period of time might vary. And we know that those residents those theme parks will open. Now, I don't know whether it's going to be, they're going to open in June or July or next January, but at some point they will open. So we know that the situation is short term. Someone who works at a restaurant that's closed, that's a totally different situation. And so, again, I think we have to look at everything on a case-by-case basis. I mean, it's important to note that for the month of April, we've had, surprisingly very few requests. And we stand ready to, whether it's May or June. And I think this is also, what we've been lucky in the sense that I've heard from a few property owners where their residents have organized to do a rent strike. We've had we haven't had that happen, and I think part of that is that we try to maintain an ongoing dialogue with our residents. I mean, well before this, and certainly we have constant dialogues and resident forums where we talk about, for instance, when we buy a community, we talk about certain improvements that residents want to see, and we get their input. And so, I think part of this situation, if there's a lesson learned, I think that our outreach and interaction and relationship that we try to maintain with our residents, certainly it pays dividends in this kind of situation. And I think that certainly owners who have not maintained a level of goodwill with their residents may be finding out that there's a different situation for them in this crisis.
So establishing that relationship can really make a difference. And
Absolutely.
If you haven't done it by now, then it's a good time to do it and keep it up going forward.
Absolutely. And part of it, 85% of what we own have some level of rent restrictions and affordability. So we have to recertify many of our residents every year. So that gives us a dialogue to have an interaction, and very often, those kinds of helping them work with paperwork. About half of our residents are Section 8 voucher holders. So, there's always paperwork that's associated with that we work with both the resident and the housing authorities. So I think the nature of our business is that there is there's a need to have an ongoing dialogue, and I think that this, which is certainly enhances that, in a situation that we have now.
Yeah, certainly. You were talking before about we don't really know what May will look like, what June will look like. So are you taking this month by month, or are you offering any longer term solutions, even maybe with some caveats in them that it may change a little bit from month to month?
Suzanne, our leadership, we have leadership meetings every other day, and if need be, we have them. If there's a situation that arises, we have it we'll have it more than every other day. This is a dynamic situation, and the collection of rents is really only one part of it. I think that if you were to look at where a lot of the concerns our residents have are in terms of how do we deal with maintenance requests. I mean, we, for instance, closed most of our rental offices. We still have staff there, but it's by appointment only if a resident needs to talk to us, or we encourage telephone or email communication to minimize our staff interaction with residents. We've minimized. We still have our maintenance techs there to focus on certainly maintaining some of the common areas, but also dealing with, maintenance requests. And although we're trying to limit that to what I would call essential requests that have, if someone doesn't have hot water, or, there's a smoke alarm that needs to be replaced, something like that. But we're trying, if it's a closet door sticking, we probably are not going to, subject our maintenance tech to the interaction with the resident for something like that. And certainly a lot of what we have spent our time doing as a leadership group is listening to the concerns that our on-site staff have, because, they have families, and, we're supposed to be kind of quarantining, but, they have to go in and out of apartments. And there's a lot of concerns about that. And so one of the things we're trying to do is, just as the same way, if, I'm recovering from a torn Achilles, which happened in January. And, when I go see my doctor, they take my temperature before I go in. They ask me if I've been traveling. And so, we have been doing the same thing before a maintenance tech goes into an apartment, maybe not taking the temperature, but we ask the questions. And so, you ask, do we, the solutions and how we develop them, we really look at this almost on a day by day situation, and it's likely to change. And it also depends on, where our communities are located. I can tell you that, um, we own near you in northern New Jersey. That's somewhat different than, perhaps how we're handling things in Florida versus Texas. So, we have to customize a solution for every location. And while I know a lot of the focus is on, rent payments, which of course that is very, very important, the operating side gets very, very complicated. And we probably have 7 to 10 significant renovation jobs that are going on, and how we continue some of those. And we've literally stopped any interior renovations unless it's a unoccupied unit. But even then, so it's a dynamic. I believe in talking to many of the CEOs of other real estate companies. I think everybody is looking at it from a day by day, week by week standpoint. And while we are trying to plan, and we have put together a team of people who are looking at, okay, how exactly do we go back to work when we go back? It's, as they've said, it's not as if a light is going to turn on. We have, about 70 people in our headquarters in Irvine, California, and we have a whole series of cubicles. So we have a team of people who are looking, okay, maybe we alternate work days of people coming in so that, we do every other cubicle. But the same thing with our on-site. When do we open our rental offices, or do we keep it by appointment only? So, certainly much focus is on the rent payments, but we spend just as much of our focus on the operating side. Certainly
Sure.
supplies are in short. That's where is we're all getting cleaning materials and things like that. They're in short supply. So those things are really more of an immediate concern than perhaps even the rent payments.
Sure. Yes. At the same time, we've got May coming up in a couple of weeks already. So let's talk a little more about some of the options. There are a number of solutions out there. Some of them may be offering a certain number of months of free rent, or a percentage discount, as you did in April, flex payments, rent deferrals, maybe applying the deposit towards the rent. Are there any particular ones that you recommend, and are there any solutions that you would not recommend?
Well, the one solution I think most people in the industry, this is probably not if someone's lease is up, this is not the time to give them an 8% rental increase. That would be one thing. Certainly, in our communities, we have very our turnover is very low. It's generally under 20%. So, we have residents that stay, and we certainly have the ability to raise rents as HUD area median incomes go up. We can raise by that percentage, but we're being very sensitive about rent increases in this environment. Particularly even if people have not had job losses. People that have kids that maybe they're still working, and they have to spend a lot of money on childcare. So we're very sensitive to kind of what the environment is like. But I'm not sure that there's any one method that's better than the other, although I think we're just right now very sensitive to maintaining strong occupancy and minimizing, rent increases, certainly at this time right now.
Mhm. But no particular types of breaks that you recommend one over another. It really is whatever works in a given situation.
Yes. And again, I think that this is the time to be, to be sensitive to the fact that that your residents are, they are, I mean, everybody has a little bit of a struggle as a result of this. And so being sensitive to that, I think is important.
Yeah.
And also the fact that, you know, uh, you've got, uh, more people that are at home, and the stress level is higher. I have two teenagers, and I can tell you, working from home with two teenagers, and which is why I'm doing this interview in my office, because I knew if I did it at home, I don't know when Cardi B would start coming in on, would be coming in on the background. So and those are stresses that we all have, and we're sensitive to the fact that our residents have those stresses as well.
Sure. Speaking of amenity spaces, some of those have had to be shut down, certainly fitness centers, social areas. If there are fees, maybe even part of the rent, that are linked to those, do you recommend waiving or reducing any of those kind of fees, amenity fees, as well as late fees or credit card fees? How do you recommend handling those kinds of additional fees?
Well, we generally speaking, there's no fees at our communities for the amenities. That's part of what they're getting. I think we are all sensitive about late fees and things like that, and credit card fees. We want the rent to be paid, and we know some people, just because of circumstances, have to pay late. I mean, certainly in many of the states that we operate, including California and New York, they have, the governor and in both of those states have said, look, we're not going to have evictions or late fees during this time. And I think that's a good policy. And, I mean, just to give a perspective, though, I mean, there's a perspective that, there are lots of evictions in the multifamily industry. And I think that the perception of that is much greater than the actuality of it. I mean, we had, in 2019, under 60 evictions on 10,000 apartments, and most of those were not related to payment of rent. They were, relative to other things of excessive noise or something like that. It was generally a situation where they were not a good resident, but not because they didn't pay their rent. And I do think that, it's one of the things that gets blown out of proportion in the apartment business, that the eviction rates are very, very low. The number of evictions filed is high, and many of the scholars and people that look at evictions look at the numbers that file. And I can tell you that we probably filed, probably 3 or 4 times the number of actual evictions, just to protect our rights as a landlord. But the evictions, at least in our portfolio, and I find that in many others, are much lower than what people think.
Sure. Oh, that's good. Certainly at this time. Let's just talk a little bit about how this can impact the property owner and manager, and then we will move on to questions that we're getting from the audience. As you've said, rent payments have been much better than anticipated. There's additional stimulus coming in and other options, both to help the residents and the property owners. But expenses have gone up. You were talking about some of the cleaning products and other products, and and certainly those kinds of expenses are going up based on demand. There have been some breaks with things like mortgage fees from the GSEs, but there are still issues with having to pay mortgage fees, utility bills, taxes, and certainly payroll. Payroll is not going to go away if you want to maintain your property. So how can owners and managers best meet their expenses, especially if it becomes harder for residents to pay their rent or their full rent? Maybe they can only pay their partial rent over time, depending on how much more stimulus there is. What are your best recommendations for owners and managers to meet these expenses?
Well, the one thing, and maybe to answer it in a slightly different way, I mean, the one, and all news is not negative. I mean, certainly, crises, end up making you innovate in certain ways. I mean, surprisingly, since this whole thing has happened, I mean, we've had, and I don't know the exact number, but probably 50 move-ins in the month of March and April, and many of these move-ins we've done, without having face-to-face interaction with our resident. So we've learned, for instance, to use a lockbox when residents come to move into their apartment where they get their keys, or, we have Amazon lockers at a number of our communities, and we leave their welcome package and their keys in an Amazon locker. In many instances where we have to get a physical inspection from a housing authority, where they can't come out and do that now, we've done electronic, where we do some kind of a camera, and we get electronic signatures. Many of these things, for instance, with many of the housing authorities and requiring, for instance, hard, live signatures, we've now are starting to do electronic signatures. So these are all innovations that we probably are not going to go back the other way. So I think one thing that has happened as a result of this, and you could look at 9/11 and you could look at other situations that have happened, and sometimes we get more efficient at doing things. And I think, so we certainly have to pay expenses and things like that, and some of our expenses have increased as a result of this, but we're learning to do some things with, like more things in efficient ways that hopefully long term will lower some of our operating expenses. So, I just read where the CEO of one of the, I can't remember which bank, said that, the fact that they were working very, very well remotely, he made the comment that I'm not sure we're going to have all the office space that we did previously, that's something that, I'm glad we're not in the office business, but, so many of these situations like that, if there's a silver lining, is because we end up innovating during a period like this.
Yeah, so some good long-term changes that will come out of this. So let's turn now to some questions from the audience. Going back to taking things on a case-by-case basis and talking with residents individually, do you require any kind of documentation to substantiate the resident has been impacted financially by COVID-19, or do you just take it at face value?
Well, one of the things that we ask for documentation, when we got, we own a number of project-based Section 8, and HUD was very forthcoming in providing us a way that we would recertify a resident in one of our Section 8 communities where basically we redocument their income, and then, HUD makes up a greater portion of the rent that the resident can't pay. But we've kind of taken some of those forms and we've adjusted them. And what we're doing, we're asking our residents that need, some level of assistance to fill out a form that we provide and provide documentation of that. And we also then provide them with a sheet summarizing their government benefits that they may be getting and about to receive. So yes, we do require that, and we ask them to submit the request in writing with backup, but we also use that as a mechanism to provide them with information of benefits that they may be eligible for that they may or may not be aware of.
So there's a benefit for them too, which I guess you can express to them when asking for this, because you are helping them ensure they know about these benefits.
Yes.
Looking ahead, have you planned for any strategies or policies regarding coping with the possibility of a second wave during the winter months later this year or going into 2021? Have you looked to that, looked forward at this point?
Well, we've certainly learned a lot during this situation. I think ultimately, that's something that we should do some thinking about, and I do think everything is going to have some level of change. I can see at sporting events that there's a line of people getting their temperatures taken. Not sure of exactly the long-term implications, but certainly there's a lot that we've learned. I think, for instance, we will have a greater inventory of cleaning supplies and things like masks and other things that, we continue to run short on right now. So I think you're going to see a lot more stockpiling of inventory so we can be ready and assume that we can operate for 60 days or 90 days without having to get new supplies. So I think that's one thing, that a lesson learned for us during this situation.
Mm-hmm. Is this a good time to go 100% electronic with payments, or as close as you can? And if so, what kind of alternatives do you find most effective for that?
Well, we have a very high percentage of electronic payments now. It's well into I believe the 60% range. So, we want to certainly, we are always trying to incent our residents to do that. And so, it is always, it has been a big part of our focus. One of the things that I would say in our resident base, which is, they're at 40 to 60% of area median income. It's a segment that is often underbanked, where they don't have bank accounts and they're using check cashing. And we often encourage them to get, a bank account, which saves a lot of money. They're not paying 5 to 8% in fees. And then, very often we're able to convert them to electronic pay.
Mm-hmm. So that's part of building those relationships and working with your residents on an ongoing basis.
Yes, absolutely.
So we have a couple other questions that are not directly related to rents and expenses, but I think people would like to hear from you about some related topics. And you did talk some about the operations of the properties. We have somebody who would like to know a little bit more about which amenities you're keeping open and which ones you're not, and how often you're sanitizing the ones that you are keeping open during this time.
Well, we've shut down everything. We've shut down every common area. We've shut down every pool. Now, most of our pools don't open, depending on the geography. And again, we're in 12 states, and half of our portfolio is east of the Mississippi, half is west. but we are basically there are no amenities that are open, and and of course the other thing I should mention, of our 80 apartment communities, about 20 of them are age restricted. They're seniors, independent living. They're 55 and over communities, and we have gotten significant pushback in shutting down the community rooms because there's always lots of card games and the like, which unfortunately, we have gotten significant pushback about having to do, but it's just something that makes logical sense. But
Mhm.
but I don't think we have any amenities, other than people can get their mail, and we sanitize our mailboxes frequently. So there's really not any amenities that we have that are open, I guess, except something that's we have outdoor things. But the bottom line, I mean, like a walking path or something like that, I mean, that's still open. But most of our I would say all of our amenities are shut down at this point.
Okay. We also have a couple questions looking ahead to expansion and acquisition. Are you finding additional properties are now more available for you to consider for acquisition?
That is a very good question, and you would think that in this environment that it would create some level of distress. We have not seen it, and maybe it's still a little bit early. I know that we are actively seeking new acquisitions, and we've made offers. We had in the last week 3 offers we've made were rejected because we weren't high enough. One challenge that we have, that we have 2 acquisitions that are in escrow, that we're in the due diligence period that we will be closing on. But we had done our due diligence before all of this happened. And so the one challenge that we haven't figured out, I mean, we inspect every unit. We bring 20 people, 25 people to a community, our team that looks at everything, our construction people. I'm not sure in this, if we had gotten one of the offers, I'm not sure how we actually would do due diligence, because I don't think we could do the unit walks. So that's a very, very good question as to exactly how you execute a new acquisition. But we're still in the market. We're looking. Have not seen, based on the last week of having a couple of offers that we made when we were told that we did not make it, that it was awarded to someone who was a higher bidder. So I have not seen the distress. And again, maybe if we're in the situation in June, it will look different, but haven't seen it now. And there's still very strong demand.
Okay. And so is it impacting cap rates accordingly with the prices that you were mentioning?
Well, we offered a very aggressive cap rate, and we were, aggressive meaning what we considered low, and people were a little bit more aggressive. Now, there is a lot of capital that has flowed into the affordable and workforce space. So, it continues to be a competitive market. And I look at the more global situation, there's still a lot of capital in general that's out there. So I don't know how much of it, the pricing, at least in the multifamily sector, will be declining, unlike, I think, the office and retail sectors.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward, especially if we are still in this situation, as you mentioned, over the next couple of months. Well, we are out of time now. If we didn't get to your question, I think we actually did get to all the questions, but if you have any further ones, feel free to send them in. We will be sending you a notification when the recording is available. We will be continuing to produce these snap sessions about different topics going forward. So next Thursday, we will be having a SNAP session on managing property access, deliveries, and operations during COVID-19. So register and tune in if you're interested. Thanks again to our sponsor, Butterfly MX. And Daryl, thank you so much for joining me for this very helpful discussion.
You're welcome, Suzanne. Delight to speak to you today.